I'm not going to try to summarise anything at this moment in time, other than just to welcome you to this day and introduce Sarah and Zoe. They're going to talk a little bit about their on-site projects.
I'm Sarah Green. I'm a second-year PhD researcher at Loughborough University, and I'm looking at the wellbeing benefits of textile crafting for men. So I've got a community-based craft group at Charnwood Arts, and we run weekly textile workshops for men. But downstairs in the foyer, I'll be running all-afternoon workshops doing weaving. So it's just a general, really relaxed thing, just having a go at doing some simple sort of, playing around with wool, basically, on the wooden structure that's in the foyer, so you can't miss it. It's as you walk past, and we'll just be having a bit of fun and having a chat, and it's a bit relaxing, and chance for your brain to sort of calm down after everything you've heard, and
Sounds great. And Zoe, do you want to say anything?
Yeah. So, I'm also a second-year PhD student at Loughborough University. We've got a pair of us today. I'm Zoe Petersen. I have the stall next to Sarah, Seeds for Words, and it's a conversation that I invite you to have with me and the Glazebrook Growers Gardening Group, which I help to run. The Glazebrook Growers have various sort of levels to them. They're a gardening group on housing estates run by the residents, including me. They've become a research project for me, and the kind of rough, broad brush areas that I'm working in are commons, networks, especially actor network theory, and an ethic of care, and they're also an art practice. And any words, comments, thoughts that you leave with me will be taken back to Croxted Road Estate, where we're based, and you'll take away seeds that we harvested this year on the estate. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sarah and Zoe.
Hi, I'm Dan Scott. I'm a artist and researcher, PhD researcher in London at the University of the Arts. And I'm inviting you to a listening workshop in the gallery this afternoon, where we will explore some games from free improvisation and music. And I should say my research kind of looks at the range of listening practices in sound art and also in socially engaged practices. So we'll be using these techniques through these games, and then that will lead us into a conversation about the event. And that's that. Thanks.
After the end of each presentation, if we have time for any Q&A, we will do. But if we don't have any time, we'll just go on to the next session, and maybe people can have questions or discussions during coffee breaks or over lunch or other times of the day. So it's just for me now to welcome Bo Olawoye. Apologies if I've got the surname wrong there. Just Bo. Okay, Bo. I'm sure many people know you anyway. Learning on the Edge, social engagement now. Bo, thank you.
So my name is Bo, and I'm the community engagement producer for New Art Exchange, but I also work as an independent engagement curator. So what I'm going to sort of talk about this morning is just give a couple of look at two kind of examples of social engaged practice and kind of what it looks like now. And just to kind of talk briefly about two particular examples. One is a project that I worked on as an independent curator, and then one is a recent project at New Art Exchange. Okay, so this slide here, I'm basically just kind of describing what social engagement really should be, what it means to me, what it should encompass now. So it's really important that working in sort of arts and participation and gallery work or community work, that the projects actually empower people. So they empower people through art and creativity. That it promotes social justice issues. So when you're working with people, it covers kind of personal development, health and well-being, and also things that are concerning people at this kind of moment in time. So it's an opportunity to use that creativity and art and exhibitions to reflect people's concerns now. So as we're aware, we're kind of living in a very kind of turbulent time at the moment, so it's very important to kind of reflect for me in terms of my practice, those kind of issues. The other key thing to consider is that it's always collaborative. So as somebody who curates and manages learning programs, it's really important that the people that you're working with are not just kind of passive, and that it is genuinely a collaborative project, and you listen to the kind of needs and concerns of your participants, and they collaborate with that artist. Those are the kind of best methods. And also that it can sort of transform people's lives in different ways, in unexpected ways sometimes. You may think that you're kind of working with a group and that, you know, that it's about kind of enjoyment, but for some people it does have a major life-changing effect, the results of that project. So I'm just going to briefly talk about a project that I did at an organisation called Backlit, which was an artist-led space. It's an artist-led space in Nottingham. And this was basically like a contemporary approach to the actual history of this building. It's an artist-led space, and it occupies 2 floors of this building, which used to be an old Victorian factory. So the project basically looked at the history of that building, which was owned by originally built by a Victorian philanthropist called Samuel Morley in the 1800s. And it was originally a kind of working factory up into the 70s. And what the director discovered about that Victorian figure, that he was quite a kind of socialist in terms of, and quite ahead of his time. He was a model employer. He was involved in the abolition of slavery. He was a big supporter of workers' rights within factories. And he was a pioneer of adult education as we know it now. So he set up one of the first adult education centres in London called the Morley College in the 1800s. Starting off in the Old Vic in London. And it was all aimed at supporting the working classes. So the working class had access to good education, free education and enjoyment. And he set up this scheme called the Penny Lectures, where workers just paid a penny to hear speakers, writers, scientists. And as I say, it was kind of the forefront of adult education. So I'll just tell you briefly about the programme that was actually funded by the Heritage Lottery Fund. What Backlit decided to do curatorially was also focus on an exhibition inspired by Samuel Morley and his work, and his achievements. Part of my role was to also develop a learning programme around that. So I designed this learning programme in collaboration with local communities in St Anne's and Sneinton, which are predominantly kind of working class, culturally diverse areas in Sneinton that were the kind of neighbourhoods of Backlit. So they basically designed this programme that I'm going to talk about, and it was based on their kind of responses and interest in the history of Samuel Morley and how they kind of related to him. And we also set up a community ambassadors programme for adults, where the community ambassadors would research and look into the history of Morley and create and contribute to a digital archive, and also have the opportunity to kind of go out and interview some of his people who had a story about kind of textile manufacturing in Nottingham and that kind of connection to Morley. Okay, so this is just a list of some of the activities, or the actual what I call the Morley Learning Programme, which took place between sort of February and November 2015. So we had a series of 3 projects called the Penny Sessions, which were combining craft, textiles, poetry, reflecting on the kind of textile manufacturing industry in Nottingham and how it relates to Morley, and working with various groups within Backlit, but also on site in St Anne's in the estate. We did a project called Finding Samuel Morley, which was a photography project exploring the kind of historical sites in Nottingham that had a link to Morley, or we found kind of statues or various things that he'd put money into. For example, he'd invested money into Nottingham Trent University. And then we had another project called the Morley Fashion Project, which was based on site in St Anne's. That was developed talking to the local residents of St Anne's, who were saying, you know, if you want to really talk about a kind of history, you know, and you want to engage young people, you need to make it quite current. So they were talking about this idea of that we should do a kind of fashion project inspired by the life of Morley. And I managed to also put that project on site, interestingly enough, in the local estate with one of the residents who owned a fashion shop, which was just called the Urban Fashion Hub on the Chase in St Anne's. So I actually hired the space by one of the local residents' shop and their small business to run the project within that. And also, as we said, we had the Community Ambassadors programme, who were sort of involved in research and development and interpreting that kind of history in their own way. So I'm just going to kind of show you a couple of images this is from the photography project. And from the last slide, we worked with quite a range of age groups, I would say, for this particular project was for mainly 18-year-olds, for adults. So this was mainly adults from St Anne's and Sneinton. So I'll just show you a couple of images from participants. And they also work with a social enterprise called Human Camera that run community projects. They use photography as, you know, social engagement practice. So they worked alongside the group to go out and photograph whatever they wanted in relation, based on the research on Morley.
These are photographs from the participants?
Yeah, these are the photographs on the participants. And then these are a couple of images from the Morley Fashion Project here, where we work with another kind of artist educator group who are actually from Liverpool, called Costumeologists, who are a duo who they do a lot of community engagement work around the UK actually, but it's all about using kind of fashion design and upcycling as a social engagement practice. So they came down on site and worked with a lot of the young people who were from the estate, who came into the shop to take part in this kind of 6-week project, creating T-shirts. They also made their own tights using particular symbols and references to the textile manufacturing industry to create these kind of outfits. These are the kind of memory boards that they were looking at, sort of to get their kind of thinking in terms of interpreting what they wanted to kind of represent in terms of Morley. And this is just a shot here of the back room of the fashion shop, which was almost like a kind of cutting room area, because the owner also made their own clothes. So it was really good to kind of literally do something on site in an area, and it attracted quite a lot of young people just coming in, wanting to kind of drop in. We did have a few days where we kind of inundated with about 30 kids, was just sort of coming into the shop. But it just shows, you know, the importance of doing things on site and not necessarily restricting yourself to being in a gallery or a building. So these are just a couple of images here where they were making their own sort of fabric bags commemorating Morley. A couple of details here where they actually drew kind of symbols related to the textile manufacturing in Morley onto tights that were kind of, I'll show you in another image here. They actually used it, it's not a clear image here, but they used those tights to almost become like tattoos. So, and you've got here on one of the kind of Muslim skirts here, there was they use these kind of pendants to kind of symbolise aspects of the Morley legacy. And we did a kind of fashion show right outside the shop on the estate, which again was to attract kind of local residents to see what young people had created. And then these are a couple of images from the Penny sessions. Again, we worked with an artist called Fiona Richards, who again was exploring the Morley legacy in a slightly different way, using kind of craft, poetry and writing. So this was a kind of medal to Samuel Morley that she came up with this idea of getting participants to create something to commemorate Morley's achievements. Because he was offered a peerage by local government, well actually by the Queen, but he actually turned it down because he didn't want to be above the people. So I'm just going to flick through some of these images here. These were some sort of textiles projects as well. They did glove making.
How long did it last for?
About 3 months because the length of the project. So, and this is just an image of the digital archive created by, contributed by the community, and it actually still exists as a kind of resource for people to, discover Morley. Just go on to my next project. And this is just a quick quote by one of the participants who'd taken part in the Morley project, and how it had actually changed her life because she was a Muslim, and at that time, and it's quite a difficult time now, this had, for her, it was really important because it changed people's perceptions. She was very worried about how people were thinking of Muslims, so I use this quote a lot because I just think it's about how it's kind of empowered somebody. And I'm just going to quickly talk about a current project. This was at New Art Exchange, which is actually outside the building, called the Pathways Mural, which is, it was a project working in partnership with the Centre for Research in Race and Rights at Nottingham University. And this was the first Black history mural that exists in Nottingham. And this was a project working with young people from the youth centre, which is just next door to New Art Exchange, looking at local Black icons of history that we wanted to highlight. So here's a couple of images just from the workshops where they work with a mural artist. Sort of looking at the kind of textiles and pattern that the young people wanted to incorporate into the mural, which happened to be, they're quite interested in incorporating West African culture. And then here's a couple of kind of local heroes of Nottingham, George Africanus, who he's well known for being a slave in Nottingham who became an entrepreneur in the 1800s. So he kind of rose above his circumstances to become a businessman and an entrepreneur. There's a symbol of Black Lives Matter in Nottingham because there is a Black Lives Nottingham group or chapter that exists in Nottingham at the moment, that was endorsed by Alicia Garza in the US, who's the founder of Black Lives Matter. People may not know that, so wanted to highlight that. And Louise Garvey is a woman who is, she worked in the NHS in the 60s and wrote a book or a publication about Black nurses working in the NHS, and that kind of comment, she was quite kind of ahead of her time and championing Black nurses working in the NHS at that time. And these are just some of the symbols within the mural. They're based on Andinka symbols, which is a West African alphabet that the young people are quite interested in exploring. Okay. And they decided to put within this mural these kind of hidden meanings. So we've got togetherness. This symbol here is knowledge. Growth and restfulness, and to fear none but the Creator. So within the mural itself, and you'll get a chance to have a look at it when you're kind of around for the day, that kind of, it just kind of, it symbolises, kind of positivity about linking communities together with these kind of positive messages, and also the symbolism of the chains that run through the whole of the mural. Thank you, and sorry for the delay at the beginning. But, okay, thank you.
Hello, it's a while since you were mentioning the symbolic alphabet system that was included in the mural.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you can say a little bit more about that, in particular its origin, and how you feel combining that maybe connects or is read when it's revealed that there is a hidden alphabet system in a local mural. What's the politics or the effect of including a hidden alphabet system from elsewhere?
Well, the hidden alphabet, which it's interesting you were saying about the politics of that, because it actually came from the young people during those workshop sessions, and because it was quite a multicultural group of young people, and some of the young people were of West African origin, and they were invited to bring in fabric or pattern that they wanted to include in the mural. So we got into this conversation with the mural artist about Andinka symbols, which is from, I think it's from Ghana, which is seen in a lot of African fabric, but I didn't even know it exists. I didn't know that these kind of symbols and design had meaning. So the young people were quite interested in including these Andinka symbols, which they're not only words, but they are philosophical phrases. They were interested in including those in the design of their mural. And also, when you go and have a look outside, what runs through the design of the mural, one of the young people had this idea of using chains and links. There's kind of gold chains, so it's about kind of unity and using those kind of philosophical and positive symbols within that mural. So it doesn't come from me. The way I work, as I said mentioned in my slide, is it's really essential that on any participatory and engagement project that I program, manage, or develop, it comes from the actual participants. It's not my idea. I always hand it over to the participants, whether they're young people. I do a lot of work with teenagers, or culturally diverse groups, or it tends to be kind of marginalised and disadvantaged groups. I don't do a lot of work particularly with students. I don't do any work with students at all, really, if I'm honest, because that is my role in terms of community engagement, because the needs of local residents, refugee, asylum seekers, they're going to outshine. There's just so much going on at the moment that affects people, that really kind of concerns and frightens people. And the projects that I work on, some of them are linked to exhibition programming, like the exhibition downstairs is about activism. So there's an exhibition called The Rebel Scene, which is about two artists work with loads of local activist groups to create that installation downstairs. And the next door project is Fighting Walls, about using murals as activism in Iran and Egypt. So it is about that kind of those exhibitions were kind of programmed, obviously 6 months or a year in advance, but it's a very prominent topic now with the state of the world as it is.
So I My name's Linda, and I was struck when you were like focusing so heavily on Samuel Morley. When you do any history, there's always cracks. There's always issues that emerge that you find out, and it wasn't obvious to me that they were present in what was presented to the public. So where are there the gaps? Like, you know, did he have servants? Did he, you know, like there's always things you find out when you do history. Was that, did you find, you know, sort of the dirt or the broader picture even?
Well, there wasn't necessarily any kind of cracks in terms of his history, and with that project, the actual historical research behind it actually came from the director. It was part of a 3-year research that he discovered about that building that Backlit occupies. So he actually did, I only worked there for sort of 2 years or so, but he'd been investigating what is the history behind that building, and then found out that it was an extra, manufacturing building, and started delving into the history of the person who had built it. It was Samuel Morley. It was part of his factory empire, and looking into the fact that he was an abolitionist. And when I've talked about that project before, I've had a couple of some questions around, well, why are you celebrating, an abolitionist? But it's more about, it's not necessarily celebrating Samuel Morley. It's kind of looking at, well, that relates to the history of that building. So we're not devaluing, there's a lot of contentiousness around, abolitionists and slavery, and probably if we did delve deeper, there might be a murky past, but we didn't find anything particularly that questioned the fact that he was involved in the anti-slavery movement.
That both projects are quite different in that way, aren't they? One seems to be more top down. It's like the interest of that research maybe came from the director of the gallery and the studios and things, whereas it seems the other project was slightly coming from a different angle. Is that right? So it was identifying an issue or one, I don't know.
Yeah, it really depends on the kind of funding and who you're working with. So with the mural project, that was kind of grown out of this, looking at actually the cultural diversity within Hyson Green, this particular area. It's a very culturally diverse area, and because New Art Exchange is about programming culturally diverse artists locally, globally and nationally, and their focus on developing and working with culturally diverse communities, that kind of fitted into, we had more control over that project with the mural project. So it just really depends how you're working, etc.
I suppose, sorry, just very quick, because I know we've got to go for tea. But again, I was really, struck. I wanted to ask all of you, and it's just a practical question, and you don't have to answer it. But I mean, I think it's like whether you're kind of working with a community that already exists, or whether you're having to get a community. How do you get people engaged? I think no one's really talked about that, and I've done drop-in things and stuff. Again, I want to engage with people, but unless you've got either an organisation behind you or you're going into an already existing one, I mean, I think it's really difficult, and I'd like to kind of, how do you do that? Because I think, again, yesterday what we were talking about was like there's this need, like we're all in these ghettos, like, in terms of Brexit, we talked about Brexit yesterday, we talked about all of that, and it's like, how do we start to have those dialogues? Because we're all here, we want to. But then how do we get those dialogues happening? And I think that's something that hopefully, because we are doing that today, it's kind of much more of an open sort of thing. It's like, how do we reach out to those people? How do we have these difficult conversations like we're talking? How do we do that? Because I think that's something we want to do, but, how do we, and I've been, it's just really, I think.
Well, the answer to that question is, it is not an easy answer, is that you literally do have to do the groundwork, and you have to go into those estates and places, and sometimes it's great, sometimes you will literally face a lot of hostility, which I did. I've worked on estates, and I'm not actually surprised to feel hostile, because they're treated like a tick box. They're not people, they're the community, they're, I'd like you to do a project with young people, I'd like you to get a group. And it's kind of that really uncomfortable
conversation that I have with certain programmers or curators or managers when they start talking to me about getting a group. It's like I'm getting some furniture. And it's like, well, we'd like you to do this and this is the outcome. Well, and my answer is usually, well, why don't I ask them? What do they want to do? They'll work with an artist who comes from that background. And that is, again, crucially important, that you work with artist educators or people who have experience working with people. But, you know, and sometimes that does come from funding. It's kind of, well, let's tick the box of the marginalised group. Let's tick the box of, you know, I want refugee asylum, seeker groups. But it's not easy. You do have to go in there and talk to people, and they might respond to you quite badly. But it is about developing those relationships and having to go in and talk to lots and lots of people, and not, you know, you have to be quite fearless about it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to support what Bo's saying, because the project that I mentioned yesterday, Wonderland, which was that I did in partnership with the New Art Exchange here, was 15 months deliberately, it was 15 months deliberately so that I had the time to work with the local community that Bo is talking about, which is a very, very multicultural community in this neighbourhood. And so part of the reason that I picked up on something you guys were saying about this long life learning, you know, about how do we map impact, how do we build time to have these conversations, and I guess it's linking as well with themes yesterday around measuring impact and how do we sustain dialogue. So all of those things I think are quite pertinent with what you're saying, is it takes time, and you have to go in, you have to have time to go in and build the relationships, and also to listen and to find out what it is that they want, whoever they are, to talk about. And I think it's interesting talking about the kind of goldfish bowl theory. It's also about having the right people in the room, because you can have the best models set up, the best methodologies in place, but it's actually about having the right people in the room who want to be there so it works. And that's something that I think probably we might revisit later on as well.
I think we're going to have to, I don't know if you want to respond to that, but again, it's kind of trust. I think that's it, isn't it? You need to get people to trust you and to be able to create that space where those things can happen.
And it takes time.
And that's time. It's that relationship and it's nurturing, you know, it's all of them facilitating and things like that. And I think that's what that's not what's understood in the kind of current academic system. That's on record now.
Yeah, and just
sorry, Helen, I think, we're going to have to go to break, I'm afraid. But, no, you want to respond to
I was just going to say that, also another thing to kind of mention is, a lot of people aren't comfortable doing it and they don't really want to do it. They kind of want to do engagement work with certain communities, but they don't act. When they realise the reality of it, they're not comfortable with doing it, which is fair enough, that I totally get that. But if you're, you know, for me, it's not a job. It's like, it's an inherent part of me. I do love working with people, and so although it's hard work and you hear some very, very difficult stories, you can encounter hostility, I do love it. So that's all.
Thank you so much, that's brilliant.
So I'd like to introduce the panel now. We have a situation in Coventry, Cyberformance, dialogue and participatory learning platforms, and Rachelle Viader Knowles will chair.
Welcome everyone, it's great to be back, and we're going to be talking about a project from that we've just finished at Coventry University last week, so it's quite undigested. My name is Rachelle Viader Knowles, I'm an artist and researcher, but this project has emerged from my role at Coventry University as Associate Head of School of Art and Design responsible for internationalisation. So as part of that project, we invited Helen Varley Jamieson to come as our first Faculty of Arts and Humanities International Artist in Residence for 2016 to bring with her her project, We Have a Situation, to Coventry. So I'm going to give a brief introduction to the project and to our panellists, and then we're going to hopefully have 3 quite different takes on what has happened, and then we'll invite you to participate in a discussion with us where hopefully you'll be able to assist us in beginning a process of critical reflection of a project that is, of course, still extremely fresh in our mind. So the what's, where's and why's. So we have a situation. Coventry was an immersive participatory networked performance followed by a discussion. So one of the things that's really important to sort of mention is that the rationale for the performance is to really stimulate discussion and dialogue. The idea for bringing this project to Coventry really emerged out of the last InDialogue symposium a couple of years ago, and as Rhiannon mentioned yesterday, it's very interesting that we've now had this sustained dialogue with Grant Kester as part of InDialogue. Grant Kester and other writers such as Claire Bishop, who have become so prominent in thinking through these sorts of dialogue-based and socially engaged threads in contemporary art, focus their attentions primarily on participatory dialogue practices that occur face-to-face. So with this panel, I was interested in extending that conversation towards thinking through practices that engage more with technology and more mediated forms of dialogue-based practice. So that's just sort of a little bit of the what and why we got to be here with this panel. So the where of We Have a Situation Coventry, also responding to some of the points that came up yesterday around thinking about the global and the prefix trans in terms of transnational. The term that I have become very engaged in thinking about in my own doctoral research practice is the translocal, and thinking about developing sort of person-to-person or place-to-place sets of dialogues and connectivities. And that's something that is really informing a lot of my thinking at the moment. So the where of the project was also thinking about Coventry and the dialogues that are really infusing our city at the moment, really framed around the role of the university within the city, a particular certain moment in Coventry where we're facing deep council cuts, threats of library closure, for example, just at the moment when the university is expanding and we're moving forward with Coventry as a UK City of Culture bid. So this notion of the relationship of the city and the university is one that is very loud within our city at the moment. So we wanted to bring students into this dialogue. The project We Have a Situation Coventry brought together an interdisciplinary group of students from across the 3 schools within our Faculty of Arts and Humanities. So we had students from creative writing, from fine art, from photography, from journalism. Master's students? Yeah, a large group of master's students from culture, communication and media.
Close enough.
Close enough. So we brought together quite a lot of different perspectives from the students, and it was really the first time that they had had an opportunity to work in such an interdisciplinary context. So that was very much an interesting part of the project. You'll hear lots more about it as we go through, and I keep forgetting to press the buttons. The where of the project was also that we decamped from the university into a local theatre called the Shopfront Theatre, which is a former fish and chip shop in the city centre. And certainly in my mind, that was a very important part of moving outside the usual framework of the university and into a very different sort of space. We engaged local community in many different ways, including, this is an online Titan pad where citizens responded to a bunch of questions that we posed, and also another online forum called Street Life where a lot of really interesting perspectives were generated. And the residency started with Helen giving a public presentation at the Herbert Art Gallery and Museum, and completed with this immersive residency last week. So, to introduce our panellists, Helen Varley Jamieson is a writer, theatre practitioner and digital artist from New Zealand, currently based in Munich, Germany. Helen's one of the founders of Upstage, an artist-led open-source online platform for Cyberformance, and she'll be talking more about the development of that platform that we used for We Have a Situation. In 2012, she was one of the organisers of the Symposium, a one-day online symposium about cyberformance and networked performance, after which she co-edited with Annie Abrams' Symposium, the book, published in 2014. She's an active participant in open source and feminist networks and events, and since 1999 has been the web queen for the Magdalena Project, an international network of women in contemporary theatre and performance. There's Helen. Dom Breadmore also sat to my right. His roots lie in photography and the moving image. He's also a musician and likes to tinker with coding and electronics. Dom has spent 15 years using technology to help uncover the stories behind people and places through film and photography and exhibitions and installations and interactive new media. He's worked extensively with galleries and museums, local authorities, schools and communities. Dom is creative director of Ludic Rooms, a post-digital arts organisation led by a collaborative approach and a passion for creative technology. Their work is inquiry-led and site-responsive, rewarding curiosity in the playful. Ludic Rooms is a socially engaged, non-for-profit organisation working in real-world settings, supported by creative technology to allow artists, workshop participants and audience a space to make a difference in the world around them. And Dom joined us at Coventry University about a year ago, contributing to research and teaching with a specialism in experimental media narratives, practices, hybrid production modes for screen media, critical digital media theory, and reactive creative media.
Blimey.
My job description.
Katherine Wimpenny is a reader in arts-related research and pedagogy and is co-lead for research in the Disruptive Media Learning Lab, the DMLL, at Coventry University, where she works on a wide range of cross-faculty projects and externally funded international education research projects. And our project, We Have a Situation Coventry, was funded by the Disruptive Media Learning Lab. Katherine has a particular interest in open and creative and participatory approaches with qualitative inquiry, whereby learning with co-participants is reciprocal, where participants are not kept at a distance, and where perspectives and viewpoints can be explored through the research process. Using the arts and the artistic process has enlivened her research practice and enabled her to enrich, deepen, and expand the ways in which she explores questions and opens up conversations with research participants. Whilst also leaving space for the viewer or audience to add to the picture, which sits well when considering the complexity of human life and experience. So I'm going to firstly invite Helen Varley Jamieson to come and talk with us about her practice.
So thank you for the introduction, Rachelle, and thank you for inviting me here for this project, and thank you to InDialogue for programming us to be able to talk about it. It's really great to be able to cram in this kind of reflective bit immediately after the project, because often I'm an independent artist, so normally what happens is I do a project and I immediately have to do something else. So I really enjoy having the opportunity or the obligation or the force to make me think about what I've just done. So I'm going to give a little bit of a background to the project to give it a context and try and explain what we're trying to do. I come from the theatre, and since '99 I've been exploring the internet as a site for live performance. So the fundamental thing in my work is that it's live. I do actually do sometimes non-technological kind of things as well, but since '99 most of my work has been in some way using the internet. And I call it Cyberformance. It's a word I made up in 2000, and it's basically about bringing together remote or distributed performers or artists or participants to create live artistic experiences using internet technology. And I wrote a thesis about it in 2008, and I'm not going to talk too much about what it is because you'll kind of get an idea through the talking about the project. But if you're interested, there's a lot of information on the internet about it now, including the symposium, which has recordings from all of the presentations that were at this online conference. And yeah, my own site there, which has a lot of information about my work. So the platform that Rachelle already mentioned, Upstage, is something that I've been involved in the development of since 2003. I was working with people, I was in New Zealand and working with people in the UK and Finland, and I was travelling around a lot doing the performances that we were making, and we were using freely available chat software to do this. And this was good, but it was limited, and we kept running up against things in these softwares that didn't kind of mesh with our creative ideas. And we were saying, wouldn't it be great if we could make our own software and if we could have some control over it? And we managed to get a tiny bit of funding from the New Zealand Arts Council and developed this platform called Upstage, which has now been running since 2004 when we launched it, with very little money and mostly an enormous amount of voluntary work. So it's open source, it's artist-led, and it allows us to create live performances that are delivered to a browser. So the audience and the performers only need to have a browser. And this was a really important thing for us to make this work really accessible. You can just click and the stage will load. And you can participate in the performance through the text chat, and everybody sees the same thing and hears the same thing that's going on in the browser. Obviously, as technology is progressing, now the technology that we used in 2003 to make it is just about obsolete. It depends on Flash, so therefore it doesn't work on mobile devices and tablets. So we're now in this kind of crisis period with it, where we know we have to completely rebuild, and we're looking for funding to do this. It's a big job. We've got a few different people that are trying to develop it in their spare time, to redevelop it rather. So yeah, this will take a long time. We need some software because we have projects, like we have a situation that are ongoing that need this kind of software. As an artist, this has been a really interesting process for me to be involved in. Before I was involved with Upstage, I had done web development. I knew how to hand code HTML and things like this, but I'm not a programmer. I have been involved in it as an artist, contributing to the conversation of developing the software, which is a really interesting thing, to be intimately involved with the creation of the tool that you're using. And I always try and encourage artists who are using technology to actually look under the hood and to get an understanding of how it works, because the technology actually impacts what we can do. And it's much better if you are in a conversation with your technology rather than just fighting with it all the time. So if you're interested in finding out more about Upstage, you can go to the website. For a long time with my... oh, the battery's falling out. That's not going to help, is it? It's very loose and floppy. So the sort of first part of my Cyberformance practice was very experimental and very much about developing the form and finding out what we could do and how things worked, with creating performances with people that I'd never met physically, working with audiences who we couldn't see. We only had this idea of through the chat. And at a certain point, I started to think, how are we talking with the audience? And to see my practice as a kind of a conversation. So when people are watching online, they can chat, and they do, and people have a different relationship. You're sitting there passively in front of me watching and listening to me. But if you're sitting at a keyboard watching and listening, you naturally want to get involved. You naturally want to chat. And so the Cyberformance becomes a conversation. And I started to look in my work at how I could develop that and use it not just as a artistic practice, but as a discursive practice as well. And the first piece that I did that I could really say is exploring this a lot more deeply than my earlier work was a piece called Makeshift that I developed in 2009-10, and then we toured it 2010 to 2012 in collaboration with Paula Crutchlow, who's down in Exeter doing a PhD now around discursive modes of art making. So this was a real-time network performance and discussion event, and we were looking at the topic of consumption and disposability. And we situated the performance in two separate living rooms. Paula was in one, normally in England, and I was in another one all over the world. This was the site, was the internet and these two domestic living rooms. So people would invite us to come and do the performance from their house. And we would have a small audience in each living room and an audience on the internet. And we were connecting the three audiences through the upstage interface. And we situated it in domestic living rooms for purely practical reasons. We didn't have any money. So we thought, well, let's use what we have, our houses, other people's houses. And also because we wanted to bring the focus onto the domestic and the personal and how these issues of consumption and disposability manifest in our daily lives and encourage people to really think about that. So it was participatory, it was co-authored by the audiences in the houses and online. We gave them specific questions and activities that structured the performance, but within that structure there was a huge amount of improvisation because we never knew what the audience were going to say or do. We were very playfully using the digital technology. People in the houses were helping us. They were operating the webcam and doing different things for us, so they were really having to participate in the making of the performance with the technology. And I'll just show you some pictures. So this is me in a living room. The people are sitting around in the living room with the projection of Upstage, so that allows them to also interact with the online audience. And it meant that people are in quite a different sort of frame. You know, if you're sitting in a theatre space, you have codes of behaviour that you know, you quiet and you behave yourself. When you're in a living room and you've got cups of tea and all this kind of thing, you're in a very different frame to receive the information and to interact. So this is what the online interface looked like. We had webcams from each house. We had a series of images from the places where we were that situated everything. So we were connecting, this time I was in India and Paula was in the UK, and we always tried to bring as much of the local in as we could and ask the audience about where they were and what it was like where they were. So people were describing their physical surroundings, the weather, their state of mind and things. We had a virtual character called Dave, who was a kind of provocateur and MC and sort of white man in a suit who went through an existential crisis and provoked really, really interesting, diverse reactions in people. Some people loved him and some people hated him. How am I doing for time?
You're halfway through nearly.
Okay, good. People were asked to save up all their plastic recycling for 24 hours before the performance and bring it with them to the house. And in the middle of the performance, we made kites out of it. People online would also do this and send us photos, so we developed this big archive of kites made out of plastic. And the discussions that we had about the plastic while we were making the kites, one woman had, she'd got a new double bed mattress that came in a huge plastic wrapper, and she'd had to carry this on the tube across London to get to the performance. And she said just how incredibly conscious she was of this big mass of plastic that she was throwing out. And then we made a kite out of it, so I don't know what's happened to it since. But just these kind of actions that prompted people to think really differently. Or another woman that brought a Coke bottle, and she said, I want everybody to know that I didn't drink this Coke. It was my boyfriend and he left it in the house, and I really don't want anybody to think I drank this. And she was really embarrassed by this piece of rubbish. So that, and the people online would also join in and make comments on the rubbish that they could see and the tights they were making. It's not moving on now. Oh, yep. Okay, so this brings me then to, we have a situation, which the project that we've just done in Coventry, I've been doing it now since 2013, and this is the 6th situation. And we described it in 2013 when we started it as a series of live, trans-border, online, offline participatory performances addressing current cross-cultural issues, which is really a mouthful, but it is kind of what it is. And people have talked about all kinds of different trans, like trans-local, transnational, trans-everything. So trans-border, to me, it's meaning crossing any kind of border. So we're crossing over languages and cultures and problems and locations. And one of the ideas behind the project was to further develop this idea of using upstage and network performance in a discursive way. And I was also looking to connect with a lot of different local arts organisations around Europe and to look for a partner for Upstage, which didn't exactly happen, but we certainly got some investment into it and a lot more people interested in it, and we were able to further develop what we could do with it, particularly with having a live audience in the space and connecting that with the online audience. So I had some of these kind of questions in my head about really using Cyberformance in a political way, not just making nice art, but actually thinking about what I'm doing at a social and political level, and whether this is a good tool for that. And I'm also very interested in how things like social media and the internet generally have become so commercialised. I've been involved in the internet since the mid-90s at a time when it was a really different environment to what we have now. So, you know, in some ways it's been quite depressing to see it go in the way that it's gone, but I think it was also quite inevitable. But I'm very interested in how we can look at other ways outside of the commercial internet, outside of this kind of idea of clicktivism, how we can really reach people and engage with them at a meaningful level. And my own artistic processes are very networked and collaborative, and so I'm also interested in how these processes work and if they're providing us with new models in the world. And Grant Kester also mentioned this yesterday about how revolutions are not necessarily useful anymore because we're living in such a different world. We're living in a post-democracy, and we need to find new ways of being revolutionary or responding to this and coming up with alternatives. And so I'm really interested in the messy processes of collaboration over the networks, and how we can do this in our art practice and how that has a wider social impact and political impact. So I'm just going to show you some images from the situations that we've already done. In 2013 we did 4. This was funded by the European Cultural Foundation. So we did 4 in a really short space of time, I think over a period of about 3 months, which was quite intense. And then had to reflect on all 4 of them. And that was, yeah, there's quite a lot of documentation on the website about that. The first one was on the topic of e-waste. The second one was on the aircraft industry, but it sort of came down to aircraft recycling, which was something I knew nothing about before. The third one, we were looking at issues of migration and integration and community. And in the last one, we were looking at the industrialisation of agriculture, really. So in each situation, the local group chose the topic. And I've gone into each one open to whatever the topic is, and then open to the material that the local participants are bringing. So as a lead artist, it's kind of not my work, it's all of our work. I'm not saying we have to do this, or this is how it has to be. So they all took a very different shape. My role has been more to kind of guide it and help the collaboration come to the the point of the performance and the discussion. So here are some images. In London, we worked with Furtherfield, which is a really fantastic online and digital art community that's been around for 20 years in London. And you can't really see, but the audience here, we played a game of Pass the Parcel with the end gift in it being an MP3 player that had already fallen apart. So we were looking at the obsolescence of technology and charting how, you have something for a few months and it's already ready for the dustbin. And looking at all of the different, where these things go, like to Ghana, to the toxic dumps, and how so much of the UK waste is just illegally shipped out of the UK to these terrible toxic dumps. And this is from the discussion at the end. So we had the discussion in the space and also online. In Nantes, we had a setup with 3 projections, and we had the audience sitting as if they were in a plane with like 2 seats on either side of an aisle. And we followed the structure of a flight. They had to come in through a scanner. They got served refreshments, which was a cake in the shape of a plane that they ate. We had a safety announcement, this kind of thing. This was eating the cake. And so along with all of these actions, we had a whole lot of information about the issues that we were looking into. This is during the workshop process of the situation in Eindhoven, where we were looking at immigration or migration and integration. So for this one, we developed a game board style and we called it Peopoly instead of Monopoly, and the characters had to follow a route around, and the tourist was the one that made it round, and the others encountered all kinds of obstacles. In Graz, we were looking at industrial farming and a whole lot of food-related issues around that. And we had a character that was a golden pig that you can just see down here that kind of made its way across the screen, broke out of its cage, went on a journey to discover what is happening with industrial farming. So here it is in the mega industrial field. And you can also see here in the text chat there's black writing and there's grey writing. So the grey writing is the online audience or people at computers in the audience in the space. And they're constantly talking. There's a constant flow of dialogue in the chat that is interspersed with sometimes scripted text, sometimes quite improvised. And the audience will sometimes go off and have a little chat of their own that becomes part of the performance. They also do things like look up stuff on the internet and give us more facts and information, provide their own perspectives. So this makes for a really rich text chat. 2 minutes, okay. Okay, so then really quickly, last year I was in Rio where we did the topic of water pollution, and that's some pictures from there. And then this year coming to Coventry for the topic of, essentially topic of community, looking at how the temporary and transient community of the university staff and students is rubbing up against the permanent community of the residents. And yeah, we were using the online tools like Etherpad, which you saw the picture of before in Rachelle's presentation, and Upstage to create this performance that is a provocation for the discussion. What can I cut it down to just to quickly get through there? What's the really crucial things? I think I've actually covered almost all of that really in what I've been saying.
Active citizenship.
Yes, I'm coming to that. Okay. Earlier this year I got to write a book chapter about this particular situation, and in this I discovered the term, in my research for it, I discovered the term proto-political engagement. Oh, yeah, okay, I'll flick through these ones quickly. Oh, okay. Oh. And I'll flick past that one. Oh, I've got the pictures of them too, sorry. I've got too many pictures. You'll see some of these pictures again, I think. Okay, so I was going to read this out and I have to read it like that. So the project is seeking to foster civic engagement, agency and activism through the combination of cyberformance and networked conversation in a post-democratic world, looking at new models of resistance. And we were talking last night about active citizenship, and I'm just going to conclude with that, active citizenship I see as a, social engagement, active citizenship, all of these terms are really talking about the same thing. They're talking about the rights and responsibilities that we have within the worlds that we live in to not only live in that world, but to shape it. And so this idea of proto-political engagement is about the really tiny changes that happen within us before we become really active. And I think a lot of what we're doing through this project is at a proto-political level. So it's very small and personal, but it's fundamental to being able to make the next steps and being able to imagine what can come next.
Great, thank you very much.
Hi, so my name's Don Breadmore, and I was invited by Rachelle to get involved in this project in the kind of idea that this would be an inter-faculty endeavour within the university. And in a time within universities where we're these ever-increasing silos are being built around us, it was quite a kind of exciting opportunity to work with colleagues who are in whole other buildings and whole other course teams. And so it's just a few of my kind of thoughts and reflections on the process and things that it's kind of brought up for me. So, so as I kind of said before, I am a, or as Rachelle said in her introduction about me, I am a lecturer at the university, but I also studied there. So I've only been a member of faculty for about a year, but Coventry is going through a massive sea change, and it's certainly a very different institution to the one that I studied at. It's now a high-ranking Modern University of the Year and University of the Year. It's gone through periods of rapid growth, a series of very impressive and rather imposing new buildings going up around the city. And I guess I must also sort of acknowledge that we've got one of those Russell Groupy type universities in the city as well, in the form of the University of University of Warwick, which is also in Coventry, as much as they'd like to claim they're in a town 15 miles away. And so the city's going through this sort of tremendous transformation. But I'm also a resident. I've lived in Coventry for 16 years, unlike nearly all of my colleagues who travel in. And so I think it's a really important point that Rachelle mentioned earlier, that when we talk about transient communities within the city, it's not just the 24-ish thousand students that Coventry welcome, but also a large proportion of the 3,500 staff that are transient communities within that city. And so as a kind of member of the community, and as a resident, I kind of understand a lot of these concerns and these issues that get raised around the way that the university is expanding across the city. And we've had this not only growth within the university, but all of this growth within, in some cases, some very, very successful local businesses and private sector that are supporting that. A lot of former office or retail or hotel buildings being remanufactured as student accommodation, often in this case by Study Inn with their very specific way of cladding the buildings. And some of these examples, like the one at the bottom, are kind of part of Coventry's proud modernist architecture that are being kind of readopted in this new context. So it's not, despite the fact that a lot of these businesses are very successful and that they are local, it's nonetheless kind of proven very divisive among the local community. And Coventry has this slightly unique scenario that the city centre is of a finite size. It is fixed by a very specific ring road, which you can see travelling around. They call it the concrete collar. And there is a real sharp differentiation between things that exist within the ring road and things that exist outside of the ring road. And the city centre will never expand outside of that predefined size. And so just outside of one of those junctions, one's just up at the top up there, right opposite this large area of red ground that you can see that used to be the Royal Mail sorting office and is soon to be another 4,500 rooms for students being built. I'm also a local business owner and run a arts organisation from Coventry Canal Warehouse, an 18th century building which for the last 30 years has been a collective group of artists and designers and creative practitioners. So I am very, very embedded in this city, not only as someone with a connection to the university, but also as someone who has lived there and worked there and brought up a family there. So I run Ludicrums. It's a socially engaged arts organisation in the city. We lead interdisciplinary projects that use technology and often working in kind of complex settings. And I'm also, by 6 months, I'm a millennial. I turned 18 in the year 2000, which just about makes me qualify. And I also grew up the son of someone who worked in IT. And so from the 1980s, we had dial-up networking at home, so my dad could use Reflections to get into the office when he was working for DEC. In the 1990s, we had the internet at home before my school had a computer. And so I'm very much born of digital ubiquity. And I guess I'm really interested, therefore, in basically everything in life under the lens of technology, but also my interest in the dialogic and this contemporary culture that manifests itself in technological ubiquity. And this definition that's described by Tom Armstrong of technology literally meaning the discourse of craftsmanship, techne, the root word being craft, and ology being discourse. So I was really excited to get involved in this project because for me it expressed a kind of bunch of ways in which we could foster communication, be creative, work together in interdisciplinary ways, and have the freedom to work with technology and without. And so throughout the whole process of the week that we were running We Have a Situation in the Shopfront Theatre, there were both analogue and digital, offline and online, active and passive, whatever words you want to use it, ways of communicating and developing material, developing dialogue, developing conversation. You can see me there in my lovely big red cardigan, joining in this process which is called the fishbowl, which is a technique that Helen brought into the process, in which it's a completely open form of conversation in which 3, 4 or 5 people are in the centre of the room and they are the ones that are allowed to speak, and everyone around the outside is listening in like a kind of peeping Tom, to excuse the Coventry reference. And but at any time any of those people can join the free... What was that for?
2 minutes.
I've had 2 minutes. I've got 15 minutes.
Oh, okay, sorry, carry on.
I've only been speaking for 7. 7 minutes and 44 seconds. Right, so so the idea being that the people in the centre of the fishbowl are having a conversation exclusively with the other people sitting in the centre, but at any point people can join in to take the empty seat. But we also facilitated conversation IRL with lots of other people in different ways as well. We worked with an older people's theatre group at the local civic theatre, the Belgrade Theatre, to generate material. We visited local residents and drank coffee in their living rooms. We engaged people in the street. And so acknowledge this proxemic idea that there's value that we can have by being in a room with one another and being together. But this project also acknowledges the rich kind of manners with which technology can facilitate dialogue. So, as Helen mentioned previously, the chat that runs alongside all of these processes but also these kind of forms that sit somewhere between the room and the internet. So the Titan Pad, for example, that acts as a kind of collaborative, note-taking, question-asking thing for the people that are within the room. And then also tools like Street Life, where we invite comment and discussion from people who are outside of the room. And you can see from some of these comments that are appearing there that this is a really divisive subject among members of the community in Coventry. But it is a subject, a dialogue that exists as much on Facebook as it does in column inches at bus stops or in post office queues. And I'm increasingly aware of this, this ongoing question about the role of the university in the city, both through people I meet in real life and also through my, my social media streams. There's a very strong language present as well. And so for me, this stems from an idea that 20 years ago, when I was an undergraduate student, we were really being forced to place a differentiation between the physical and the digital world. We were listening to Nicholas Negroponte talking about how we should be digital, how we should digitize ourselves to exist within the digital world. But we live in a hybrid world, and my work for the last decade has really much more been following this kind of Gibsonian idea that there is no differentiation in the way that we live our day-to-day lives, that we live a hybrid existence between the online and the offline. And a phrase that Florian Kramer calls post-digital, and I borrow just as much as Rachelle borrows translocal. And this project for me was really, really interesting, this freedom to choose online and offline tools, to write in chalk and on a blackboard, which is simultaneously streamed via a wireless webcam through to Upstage, which is then generating content among people in the room, but also generating conversation in the chat cycles that run alongside the performance. And it's this cyclical, never-ending kind of loop. And so creatively, I'm really interested in projects which address this conversation between people and machines. This is Carl MacDonald and Matt and Met's Blind Self-Portrait project, which uses facial recognition software and a moving wooden platform. You place your hand on the wooden platform and you hold your pen on the paper, and only when you close your eyes does the machine automatically draw a self-portrait on your behalf. But it's your hand and your ink and your paper, but only works when your eyes are closed. And so there becomes this thing with our relationship with creative technology where you start to question how much of your own creativity would be possible if it were not mediated by someone else's invention. And this also transcends through to a good friend of mine, Fliss Quick's work, where she mounted a kind of unsolicited collaboration with her niece, Rose, and looked to take her artistic creations and then recreate them in the real life. She says, "My niece Rose draws prolifically, and unbeknownst to her, I have used her drawings as instructions and attempted to recreate these in the real world. To ensure a spontaneity to match that of the initial act, each drawing becomes a one-day project where corners are cut, substitutes used, and ad hoc situations resorted to." So you can see her literally turning her car into the car drawing from above. And I was really interested in this idea of how does this transcend through to when we're working with these mixed literacies, this dialogue between person and machine. And this on the right-hand side is part of a GIF image when presented to us in its own language. And so what I did on a sort of off the back of that was I mounted my own unsolicited collaboration with Fliss and with Rose to take some of the textile work that she'd been sharing online and then initiate my own sort of third-tier collaboration. So I'm just as interested in how technology could mediate these collaborative exchanges between people and machines as also how it can do between people and other people. The other thing is when you're working with these mixed literacies that often you're working from a position of non-expertness. You're having to play and tinker and explore and find your own way through. And play is very, very important to my process, from the fantastically titled Making Games in a Fucked Up World. This is Paolo Pedicini's idea that even single-player games are conversations, that a dialogue exists between the makers and the players. They are conversations that can happen via body language and verbal language through the clash of conflicting desires, etc., etc. I'll copy that down later. And this was something within We Have a Situation that was echoed by one of the participants, a fine arts student, who said that this involvement was such a step away from her usual experience of higher education pedagogy that it felt like a game, that she had to throw herself into uncomfortableness, be willing to mess about. And I'm really interested in that idea of seriousness and how that attributes ourselves to our processes of learning and our processes of dialogue, and how play can actually kind of generate this interdisciplinarity in this age, as I mentioned earlier, of increasing silos within universities in which our different course teams are not allowed to interpollinate with other course teams. And so Rusega calls play an unpragmatic and non-result-oriented behaviour. This isn't games where there are rules, but it's being able to set yourself within a free, what we call epistemic or ludic notions of play, the kind of play that you have in the playground as a 5-year-old. And I really think that We Have a Situation fosters these kind of relationships between the people that are engaged. And that's so separate to the kind of normative disciplines of higher education. So I want to leave you really with this quote from Zach Gage also about play's role within arts more broadly. And I think that often, because it's not serious, play becomes this poisonous word. I firmly believe that it is of significant kind of social importance to activism, to engagement, and to processes like in We Have a Situation. And I'm going to pass over to Katherine now, who is going to tell you some more specifics about this pedagogic approaches that we used.
Hello, everybody. My name's Katherine, and I work in the lab, as Rachelle explained earlier, and I guess I saw my role, and my task today really is just to share with you what the experience was of being involved in this residency project, We Have a Situation, and I really want to just talk with you because I had the privilege of hanging out with everyone for that week. I sort of was cast in the role of trying to do some form of ethnography and just capture experience of what this dialogue as disruptive creative learning was all about. So that's what I want to do. I saw my role as being dialogic. I was interested in all the perspectives, the ideas, the possibilities of what was going to happen. This process flourished on dialogue. It was about interaction. It was about trying to understand as an observer and participant, very much about the weaving of understanding through the many conversations that we had. And I had support in this task with Lauren Haywood, who is a colleague in the lab who's not able to be with us today, but wanted to acknowledge Lauren's contribution. So all in all, throughout the week, there was probably around 14 of us coming in and out. That included Helen as our lead artist and facilitator. There was Rachelle and Dom, myself, Lauren, and we had around 7 students. So we've mentioned this briefly, but 2 from fine art, a photographer, a second-year journalist, a media student, and 3 creative writing students. So a group of academics, Dom and Rachelle, and also another academic from creative writing. And we also had an artist who joined us, who's very interested in participatory practice. And we had a local resident from Coventry, who himself was a filmmaker and actually had a 40-year archive of content and cultural output from the city, excuse me. Excuse me. So we had this sort of group of 14 of us coming in and out. And as we mentioned, we also had a group of about 40 Masters Media Communications and Culture students who were able to be a dress rehearsal online audience for us, which I'll talk about later. But just briefly, I think Stephen Willett's work really provides a very solid example of ways in which people construct their world in relation to the social and physical constraints that are put around them. And I think that the week-long project work that we are engaged with really sort of spoke well to this exploration of people, people as subjects, the realities of living in a city, the investigation of culture, and symbols that are created and understandings that are created through that and within that and weaved in and out of that. So this was a really important opportunity for us to explore the city, the people, the university, and as Dom has said, these sort of quite incredible structures that are taking, you know, quite a stand now in the city alongside the architecture of the city. And thinking about how we could work together to really try and make sense of what is the relationship going on here. And so that sort of provides this sort of setting that we use to really think about our time, this process of discovery. And I've got to say that at the start of the week, we did have this process of, apologies. There was this real beginning phase of process of discovery and adaptation, in which there was a real genuine sense of intrigue, I think, for all the people involved, and a sense of trepidation about what was going to happen. And we were really keen to keep asking Helen, you know, very pragmatic questions about what was going to happen and where we were heading to with the performance. And understandings about the aesthetic quality of what it would appear like, and to check on what we got ourselves into. And I think it was very much about being able to see not only about the performance at the end of this week-long residency, but it was very much about the process. And that's what we were interested in from a pedagogical point of view, to understand about how we would be able to see this project as being some really important inquiry-based, site-specific learning, you know, that by constructing our knowledge and developing understandings, this would be a really powerful tool for students, for all of us involved, for our learning and growth. And so, you know, we needed to take a deep breath and go with it, you know, and Helen really encouraged that attitude. And certainly, you know, we could draw McNiff's word about having to trust in the process and manage this uncertainty of what I think a lot of us were feeling about being uncomfortable with the not knowing. You know, there was frustration because at the launch event we had around 35 or so students who were really excited and signed up to be involved. But yet, actually, on the occasion of that week, you know, most didn't turn up. In fact, we generally had probably about 3 to 4 students who were with us at any one time. And I guess there was that concern that more students didn't come. You know, where'd they all gone, all these enthused people? And I think what the students who did turn up really said was, you know, it wasn't a great time. They had their final year projects, you know, there was project work looming, but really they said students were missing out. And they remarked that this opportunity really was about acknowledging the juggle of working life, of having to manage complexity, that it's hard work, but you get rewarded for it. There was certainly a sense from the one local resident who was the mainstay with us in the project, and I'm going to have to find the next slide because it's gone again. So, I think there was a sense from the local resident who was with us for much of the time that it was sad that more local people couldn't have been present. But, you know, as he was remarking, a lot of people in Coventry, people who would have had no connection with the university, were working. It was during the week, people working 3 or 4 jobs. You know, how could they connect? So perhaps there was a sense that the project missed out on some important perspectives. And certainly from his perspective, some of these major themes of the city, the concern of the cuts to the library and the youth clubs closing, you know, in fact, that the council were cutting most things except statutory provision. So I think there were a number of concerns and this uncertainty around the project. And, you know, in some ways it felt, is this like a university PR job that's gone a bit wrong, you know? But that said, I think a lot of the staff and students we've mentioned, you know, were committed and local to Coventry themselves. I studied at Coventry, I work at Coventry. So whilst it was difficult for us to actually engage with some of the people outside of the university who lived in the city, we did manage to generate their discussions through the online and certainly on the after-performance discussion. From an academics perspective, you know, I wanted to talk about this venturing outside of order because, you know, there were concerns about the pressure of the university, the pressure of audit culture, the issues about student numbers who were involved. You know, it was hoped that this project would be a test bed for different ways of working on the undergrad programmes, plans for an outward-facing semester project-based course, that we would have opportunity to explore creative freedom outside of assessment, and that it was really going to be important for the faculty, you know, to explore this interdisciplinary working. But I think what really this project was offering was this chance to question the economic models within the university. You know, this wasn't about how much significant impact we could offer to the many. It was about what impact this was perhaps having on the few. And in fact, could we have done this with 35 students who'd signed up initially? So I think we have to look at what this learning opportunity offered and this intimate, actually very personal space in which you could hear everything. You couldn't hide. We worked together. And with that, you know, that investment, that we need more of this type of learning, more of this opportunity. Because actually what we really are interested in is how can we map these students' trajectories who did get involved? Because what will happen for them with this transition and transformation in their learning? Because who will they be in the longer term because of an opportunity like this? So here we are, you know, in a shopfront theatre based in the City Arcade, you know, thinking about learning landscapes, thinking about trying to bring together, you know, what we see as the fine art studio. This was a shopfront theatre. You know, it wasn't an official space. The students actually said it didn't feel like learning. We walked to a house in the town. We had a reconnaissance trip around the streets where students live, where residents live. And we explored this upstage platform. And as Dom said, students messed around, they played. And Oblinger identifies this importance of pedagogy, the impact of the environment on our learning, the need for these hybrid, experiential, interactive spaces to facilitate learning, and to really think about, you know, this experience of project work as studio culture. And one of the artist participants spoke with me very clearly about how his experience of being involved was like project work from 10 years ago, of being exposed to many ideas, of using challenging mediums, the fragility of technology, but that reflective discursive space being all important, and looking afresh at the appropriateness of having space for conversation in an intense space, in a very thoughtful and reflective space. And I guess this space became this black cube, the shopfront theatre. It was representative perhaps of this new media learning space, which we were presenting our work from, which had to have integrity because that was where it was being created alongside our reconnaissance in the city. And where do students get these types of opportunities to learn in such dialogic spaces? And what happens, where will this happen if not for these types of projects? So we were looking at gallery culture, we're looking at studio culture, we're questioning community practice, we're looking at making the explicit, the implicit, how we construct our reality, the certainty of it. You know, whatever is happening is happening. We weren't trying to make a judgment. We weren't trying to come out with any correct way of seeing something. It was about an offering. And I think it was very much about this collaborative learning community that really was important. This equalising of how we were all coming together. The students at their different stages of study, the different departments, researchers, artists, residents, coming together, breaking down barriers. And people talked about it felt like lifelong learning. It was about looking at what undermines and what can stop, you know, collaborative learning communities because of imposed power relations. You know, this was about the project, the purpose of the learning activity. It wasn't about trying to be student-centred or staff-centred. It was about us all in there together. And, you know, it was really great for me to be able to go over to the MA students' lecture theatre where they were having one of their sessions, but we were offered that as a space for our dress rehearsal of the online performance. So it really was a dress rehearsal. It was really problems with audio and tech, but actually the audio clash actually worked really well aesthetically, and the students really got into it. So these students are experiencing the online offering and really thinking about how they'd felt, you know, they were involved in this networked effect. They felt they had some embodied sort of response to this. They were very uncomfortable about the ways in which students were all being massed together, you know, as being problems, and that everything was their fault in the city, you know, and they actually wanted to be seen as individuals who were respectful and were trying to, you know, be part of a city. So there's clearly a sense of discomfort at the provocative nature of the performance. But I think it was a really important opportunity for us to, again, let other students see how they could work in different spaces. So it was another extension of how many students we could get involved. And then we had these great opportunities for this socially situated learning, the great debate, the exploration of the ideas, and students being able to engage and feel that their ideas counted, that they could fit in. You know, that there was transformation and transition going on for a lot of us involved. And some of the things students were saying was that they were feeling listened to, they felt validated, they felt in a place where they could try things out. Yes, they were frustrated with the technology, but they had to make it up. And it was, I guess, this sense of having to be the artist, you know, the not knowing and going with it. And this opportunity for this heightened experience, evoking such emotional responses from people, and really connecting everyone's creativity together and realising that we could really extend and redefine and broaden all our definitions, perhaps, of what we understand by performance, by art practice, by, you know, embracing improvised acts and realising that we could all relate it to our own practices. So I think in terms of the actual opportunities here, I was interested in this idea of webs of significance and Clifford Gert's work. We're thinking about how, you know, we weave our own webs of significance. You know, we spin them ourselves, and those webs generate and maintain meaning for us, and they provide a structure for how we see the world, a mental map, if you like, of how we guide our terrain and how we explore our life. But from these webs, you know, we realise that there's lots of blank spaces, that there's unexplored territory, that there's inaccurate things that we might assume. And I guess this project was a way of illustrating the complexity of a conversation, of a situation, and that there's many gaps in the web and between the strings that we were looking at, trying to explore and make sense of. And I think just to end, this certainly was this opportunity for new possibilities and new openings. You know, as participants, we were introduced to these tools, the Upstage platform, the Etherpad, the streaming from webcams, mobile phones. We all learnt around staging a live event, co-authored with an audience. We learned about a network performance. And really, I think this whole project was in talking with people about this intertwining of self and other, inside and outside relationships, of use of imagination and perception, what really took its focus in terms of the social situation in which it was being explored and which it occurred. I just want to talk about how we mentioned what small and brave acts, you know, can this project really start us thinking about that we can use to be agents of change following this project, to open up the cracks, to meet one another, to enable the university and city relationship to be more porous. And You know, Helen talked about, you know, wanting to understand the ongoing ripples that this project has and the continuing dialogue. And I want to read something that this academic who read this incredible poem at the performance, which he created for the performance. I asked him about his reflections post-project, and he's written this thing that I'd just like to read out for you. So this is Lyle, and he just wanted to say that he was so incredibly grateful to be offered this opportunity to work with such wonderful creative minds in this We Have a Situation project. And what an opportunity it was to explore this relationship between the university and the citizens of Coventry. But he realised how quickly it evolved into an introspective journey for him, and how he found himself travelling back in time and considering his own thoughts as a young resident, his experience of being a student, and finally now his current position as an educator. And he was so thrilled that he could bring in his students to explore their creative minds and fields through this collaborative effort and to be inspired. And he was so grateful. And this project has really kicked off his own desire and promise to want to have this ongoing dialogue with Coventry residents, one that he is certain must ensure, you know, it improves relations between our wonderful university, but also the city that he loves, residents love, and which can really, you know, make some difference. So there we go.
So before we get into a question and answer, I'd just like to acknowledge that we have a couple of people with us here in the audience who also intersected with We Have a Situation in Coventry. John Hammersley was an embedded artist researcher who was there for the whole process, and Linda Taylor came down to view the performance and the discussion afterwards. So it's great to also be able to have other voices here with us. And one other thing to mention is that the format that we used at the end of the performance for the discussion, the goldfish bowl thing, which was my first experience. Helen brought this idea, and it worked incredibly well and stimulated nearly 2 hours of discussion afterwards. So in that format, rather than speaking in this kind of way, you bring just 4 or 5 chairs into the centre, and anyone who speaks has to be sat on those 4 or 5 chairs in the centre, and they speak to each other. So it's quite an intimate conversation, so much less sort of charged than asking a question in this kind of format. And then everyone else sits around as sort of witnesses, kind of listening in to that quite intimate conversation. And usually there's always a spare chair. And when you want to speak, you get up and you join the conversation. And then when you're in the conversation and you've said your piece, you can step back. So this is something that you might want to sort of try in your own context, because it was extremely successful. And we had thought we might do that today, but unfortunately we don't have time. So the floor is open for your questions, responses, provocations. Hello.
Hi, Lucas from Australia here again. My question is about the anxiety that the university employees seem to feel about their relationship of the university corporation with the rest of the city of Coventry. So I was kind of curious about something that you said, Dom, like a whole lot of people, not you included, who work and study at the university don't actually live in Coventry, and not from here, so I don't understand why that would be, and maybe you could shed some light on that. And also, just obviously, like there was discussion about the desire to interact with these exotic creatures called local residents, but there's a tendency. I mean, your MFA students they really liked being seen as individuals and not as lumped together as a whole group, but there's a risk there that residents can actually fall into that category as well.
Well, Coventry is very conveniently and centrally located in the city, in the UK, less than an hour outside of London, and I think that's the kind of spiel that potential staff get given at interview. One of my colleagues within the creative media faculty lives on Skye, which is probably not the most convenient place to commute from. But, so, yeah, I think Rachelle and I were particularly passionate about this because it doesn't make sense to us either, and certainly when I decided to go for a position within the faculty, it was from the presence as someone who felt that they belonged to the city and that the university was part of that city. And I don't know if that's shared by all of my colleagues, but Rachelle, you sort of said it never occurred to you not to live in Coventry when you started working there.
Prior to coming to Coventry, I taught at a university in Canada whose motto was "as one who serves," and that was where I sort of was trained as an academic. So I was sort of trained as an academic within this model of service to one's city, that universities are there to serve the people of their sort of immediate surroundings as well as their broader communities of discipline. So I came to Coventry with that sort of mindset that I wanted to move to the city. The city and the university should have this tight-knit relationship with each other, and the university should be the public institution of its city that the city is proud of. And I'm sort of interested to hear from anyone who lives here kind of how those sort of relationships play out in Nottingham as another, university city. But yes, there's a real tension at Coventry University. That notion of service is one that I soon realised was not the model that plays out. And many of my colleagues as well, I'm in a different school from Dom, they live in London, they live in Birmingham, they live all over the place. And often new employees are almost encouraged to live elsewhere. There's a real snobbery around Coventry as a city that many people describe as a very ugly city, very concrete, badly damaged during World War II, this kind of playground for brutalist modernist architecture. Those of us who have found our way into being proud Coventrians, have learnt to love this kind of architecture. And certainly I very much identify as an academic at the university who thinks a lot about that idea of how do we bring students into a notion of citizenship, of being embedded within the city, of learning to love it too, rather than being these separate sort of aliens.
But I also think that these are arguments that exist not just within the city-university dichotomy, but more broadly. A lot of the issues that Helen was bringing up when she first came up were more general kind of public-private space kind of arguments. The sense that, for example, my teaching building, the Ellen Terry building, was formerly an Odeon cinema, and that is a place which has deep-rooted personal, sentimental, social, cultural connections with people, and now you can't get into it without an ID card anymore. The former co-op shop in the centre of town, the former Woolworths, and various of these, and also places like the AXA Assurance building, which I showed a slide of, formerly had 5,000 local people working in it and now is a student accommodation. These are loaded sites, loaded places that are now no longer accessible. So I don't think it's just necessarily about the city and the university, but more broadly this idea of our relationship between public and private space and the accessibility of places when they pass over that divide between the two.
And does this one work? Oh, yeah. I can just add to that about the themes of we have a situation. It's always a local theme. So here the theme was the university-resident relationship. But because we're making a networked project and there are people on the other side of the world who have no idea about this particular local situation, it's about teasing out what is this situation. And in fact, these situations are always things that have relevance to people on the other side of the world or people who appear to have no connection. And when we do that through this process and we discover that it's about community, it's not just about the university in Coventry and the situation there, it's a situation that people all over the world can relate to in one way or another and have the most interesting perspectives that the people who are actually immersed in the situation don't see because they're in it.
I came down from Newcastle to be engaged in this project in Nottingham simply because I heard about it word of mouth. And my work, I work at Northumbria University and I'm engaged in dialogue practices up there, and that's the reason why I went down. And I went down to look at the work quite objectively, to think, how does this differ from work that I know? How does this differ from work that I've been engaged in my own practice? And what I came away with, which I thought was quite incredible really, is that I came away with a really powerful investment in the subject that we'd discussed. And I'm not even from Coventry. So how did that happen? But it was about this relationship between students that come from all over the country, or international students, and their relationship with people that live in the city. And it's something that we have in Newcastle. It's something that happens in many cities throughout Britain. So this idea of the translocal really made sense for me in terms of when I'd engaged in that process, because I could take back learning and thinking from that experience away with me to Newcastle. But it's more than that. It's not simply an information point that I want to make. It was this idea of the goldfish bowl that I think that Helen brought in, that I'd read about before but not experienced, has a real embodied intensity. Is that you feel hot as you sat around the circle, ready to move in. You feel impassioned. You feel as if I want to contribute to this moment now that's being discussed. And there's something incredibly visceral about the experience. And that, for me, what was incredibly powerful is that this sort of visceral, embodied experience of being in dialogue with strangers. And I know it's the first time that I've been to one of these symposiums. It's been fantastic. And yesterday, one of the things that came up for me was this different way of we think about what dialogue is, what conversation is, what the differences between conversation and dialogue are. The differences. I think one of the questions to the keynote yesterday was, what is dialogic? And my own kind of clumsy attempt to ask a question in that space then was to say, but I'm not sure Marxism is dialogic, or the idea, because he was saying something about protests and marches being transformative, so therefore they're dialogic. But for me, everything which is transformative isn't dialogic. And the dialogic has this idea of, I don't know where it's going to go. I'm sat in a dialogue in the middle of Coventry, and I don't know who I'm talking to or where that's going to lead. It's not a protest march about something, against somebody. We don't know what's going to come out of that. And that messiness and that unpredictability and that uncertainty, as Katherine was talking about, and that uncomfortableness, as Katherine was talking about, for me are really key to what dialogue practice is about. And that there's something, and this, Dom, I've never thought about it in terms of play, but actually, absolutely, play surely is a massively constituent part of the politics of dialogue, is that we're trying things out, we're thinking things through, we're learning new things. And in times when we're all stuck in bubbles, and you know, academic bubbles, this bubbles, that bubbles, and only speak our own language inside our own bubble, this idea of trying to reach out to other cultures and other bubbles and being uncomfortable and feeling it uncomfortable to do so seems to me an ultimate political move. And my kind of question after that ramble is there is one there, is about this relationship, because I feel about 100 years older than Dom, and I wasn't kind of born in this technological era, and I feel terrible when Helen, you know, tries to explain to me about open space or upstage or whatever, and I'm
source.
The source, yeah, you know, I barely can understand how to work my phone, you know. So I'm kind of, and so this relationship between live dialogue and the online dialogue for me is something that it doesn't work yet in my head, and I'm trying to understand it and understand how. But I suppose what I'm interested in is if those people that engage online have that same embodied experience of feeling tense, of feeling nervous, of feeling as if they're moving into a space which is unknown, of feeling as if their body is committed, is behind what they say, that they're putting themselves in the space. Or if somebody online just tapping away can be very anonymous, can just throw something in, then can disappear, can come in on a false name, can actually have a different sort of politics, a kind of irresponsible politics, which is not the politics which is happening in the space. And for me, it's about where those two things sit together and how they sit together.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think, I was in that dress rehearsal with the MA students, and it was just amazing to see that the raucous laughter when the wheelie bins and those awful puns that were happening through the sort of avatar wheelie bins that were on the upstage platform. But those students were talking very passionately about that embodied response. And yes, there were also other students in that room I could see who were lurking, who were just looking in. And I think that's fine, isn't it? That's what happens in conversations. And I think what it does, though, it gives you that choice. And in the room on the evening, I think there were so many conversations going in the heart of the Goldfish Bowl but if you weren't quick enough, you couldn't come in on that part of the conversation you wanted to, and you missed it, and you got your seat in the middle, and then it had moved on, and what you wanted to say was different then. But that was so exciting as well. It was really uncertain where it was going. It could have, maybe it could have ended up in a fight. Who knows? Because it was getting pretty heated. There were some incredible conversations going on about why can't we use university halls of residence over summer periods when they're empty for homeless people. There's a lot of young homeless people in the city. Some really powerful conversations, ideas, and in the room we're thinking, why can't we do that, And I guess I was just thinking during the week, though, this process, I think we have to keep remembering the importance of the process that we went through to come to the performance, because, I was concerned about, we needed some of the upper level university bots to know what was going on, and we were trying to inform them. This is happening. Do you know the conversations we're having? The Deputy Vice-Chancellor, do you know we are talking about the university in this way? And I was trying to find out off the website, what are we actively doing as a university, to support relationships? And I just think we were trying our best to bring as many people into the conversation, because it was going down sort of tracks, wasn't it? It was going down tracks that were not really important, but I guess it was how broad could we take it?
Well, we're out of time, so thank you very much. But I did just want to say that we have a situation, Coventry, for InDialogue. So thank you very much to Heather and Rhiannon for helping us initiate this whole shebang.